Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And this video is about a question that I've been getting a lot lately, which is how do you handle nested properties in a form? Okay, so first let's just kind of set the stage for this, and I'm going to do this using just plain HTML and plain JavaScript and Express. Okay, that's how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to build just a basic Express app, use a static server. It's going to be real simple, but the principles of how I'm going to do this should apply and translate regardless of whether you use templating or a front-end framework or you're building an API. The idea is the same. So let's just do the setup and explain what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is create a folder. So we'll just call this project. Open this in terminal. And all I want to do is do an npm init-y. That creates a new npm project. Then I'm going to install Express. Okay. Okay, wonderful. Now what I want to do here is we'll create a server.js file and make there a public folder. Okay. We'll start Express, so const express equals require express. Const app equals require express. And then we will create our listener, app.listen. And that'll listen on port 3000 with a callback that says console.log listening on port 3000. Then what I'm going to do is just set up that public folder, app.use express.static public. And that should set up the public folder as a static folder. And then there we go. That's it. That's all I'm going to do on the server side so far. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is then turn on the server. Nodem on server.js. Okay, so I'm going to create an index.html here in the public.html, or in the public folder. So new file, index.html. Let's just make sure that works. Okay, and I'll just put h1 hello world. And since it's an index.html in the public folder, it should kind of act as the main page. So if I go to localhost 3000, that should be fine. That'll work as the main page without a route, because again, the public folder is treated as /. Index.html always is treated as sort of the default file in a folder. So in that case, no text has to be typed for it. Okay, so essentially, let me also attach a JavaScript file to this, so I'm at it. So let me also create a app.js, and let me just connect that app, so script source /app.js, and let's add a defer keyword. Okay, so that way that code doesn't run until after the page loads. Okay, so that's all set up. Now the deal is, what we're worried about is a form that sends nested data. Okay, so right now I could send a form that has like a single property, like name Alex Merced, and we'll say like a nested property would be something like address, and we'll say address is another object with like street, state, and I'll use sort of the old Ocean Ave, Brooklyn, even though I live in Florida now. Brooklyn, etc. Well, we'll leave it at state and okay, although let's see what's not complaining about there. Well, it's because it's just an arbitrary object. Okay, that's fine. But the idea is you expected, like, let's say a data structure like this. where you have these nested properties. Okay, so problem is, how do you create a form that supports that? Well, a lot of people will try this. So they'll try to do something like this. Let's say a form, and then they'll create an input. So input of type text. So actually, I'll just do it this way. I'll use emit input type equals text, type equals text, and name equals name, and what else I want to put in the input? That's good for now, I think. I'll just copy that input a few times. And then they'll try to do something like this. Like for the address, they would do like address dot street, address dot state, and then we'll make this a submit button. So value equals submit, and this is a submit. Okay, so if I refresh the page, see now I have this form there. Cool. So now I need a route to submit to. Okay, so first we'll do it using URL encoded data. So in that case, I need to add the middleware. So my middleware, some sort of middleware, whatever framework you're using, that handles URL encoded data. URL encoded, okay, extended equals true. That's how we do it in Express. So I would create a route that that form would submit to. So app.post, we'll call it /test. And we'll just say rec res. And again, you would just write this route however your particular framework handles routing on the back end. Okay, and again, theoretically, we would be receiving res.json rec.body. So let's see what this result would give us. So I'm going to send whatever that form submits, I'm going to send it back as just a JSON. Okay, so I'm going to say, hey, when this form submits, action equals /test. That's where it's going to submit to, and it's going to make a method of post request. Okay, so let's see if this works. So name Alex, Ocean Ave, Brooklyn. Okay, and I hit submit, and right now that did not work. Why did that not work? Oh, I have to refresh the page. Alex, Brooklyn, whatever, Ocean Ave, whatever. I hit submit. And see, the problem is you don't end up getting a nested property, you end up getting this. Address.street. Okay, and that's fine. We could kind of work with that. So then how, but I want that to be a nested, like this to be nested in an object called street. So how would I make that work? You can't really do it in the form. There's no way for the form to know how to do that. Okay, so in that case, that means we have to set that up. So one way I could do this is in my, here, what I would do is I would create a new object. Okay, so I'd say const, what I want equals, and then I would say like name equals rec.body.name. Then I would say like, and then I would create the address property, and then say, okay, street equals rec.body, and then since I did this weird key here, I have to do a dynamic thing because you can't really put a dot in a variable name. So I have to do this address.street. And then state equals rec.body.address.state. Okay, then that should give us what I want. Okay, so now if I send that back as JSON, okay, and actually what I'll do is I'll send I'm going to send the original rec.body, and I'm going to send back the reformatted version, and I'll send that back as what I want, so you can see the difference. So now let me go back to the form, do this, Alex, Ocean Ave, Ocean Ave, and what am I looking for? Brooklyn. Okay, you see here, this is what I got from the form. So this is what my server received, but by creating a new object, I was able to create what I wanted, which was address as sort of a nested property. Okay, there's no shortcut here that I'm aware of. I mean, you'll see if you go Google it, you'll see people referring to like jQuery serialize, but you don't want to have to go install their library just to deal with the form. Okay, that's, I think, overkill. If you're going to use jQuery for other things, that's a possible solution. But if you're not going to use jQuery for other things, then that's overkill. Okay, so that's one way you could do it. And again, this is kind of ugly. So in that case, if this is not going to help me address.state, I should just do this and just make this state in street. So that way the object, that way I can do this instead. And make it like dot street dot state, so that way I don't have to use that weird square bracket notation. And then this should work. So I will resubmit it. Oh, I see, I forgot to change something here. Rec.body.streets state. Oh no, I just didn't refresh the form. Okay, Alex, Ocean Ave, Brooklyn. I hit submit. And see, that's just a little bit neater by doing it that way. Okay, so another way this could be done is you could do it from the front end, which means instead of using the form to submit the data, you'll just do it through like JavaScript and use fetch. So how would that look like? Well, let me go back to here. So I'll take this out, because this form's no longer gonna, that's not gonna be handled that way anymore. Instead, what I'll do is I'll do it in my JavaScript. So first thing I'll do is I'll grab the form, const form. You could do this with jQuery as well, almost in the exact same way. So const form document.query selector, and I would select the form. And then what I would do is I would create a submit button, a submit action on the form. So I would say form.add event listener, or you can use the on function in jQuery. Or if you're using like React Angular View, however you add the event to the form element, add event listener. And we're going to say, hey, when the form is submitted, this function that receives the event is going to happen. And we always want to like prevent the form from refreshing in this case. Actually, do we? Now let's do this. Event will prevent the default. Okay, for now. Event.prevent default. Okay. And then let's just console log form for a quick second. Okay, so we'll do that first. Cool. So I'm gonna go back to the form. I'm gonna refresh. Alex, Ocean Ave, Brooklyn. Now I'm gonna open up my DevTools so we can see the console log. So there it are. I'm gonna hit submit. Okay, so here's the form element. Actually, what I should have done, because again, this app.js runs in the front end. How do I know that this code runs in the front end, unlike my server.js? It's because this code is brought in through a script tag. Okay, any JavaScript that's brought in through a script tag, okay, in your HTML files, that's front end code. Any code being run by Node, that's my back end code, which you can see here. Okay, so let's see here. What I really wanted to do was actually console.dir, because I want to see all the properties of the thing. So let me refresh. Okay, I'm just gonna type gibberish for now. Okay, and you see I get the form, and when I look at the form, you see like it creates an array of the different attributes. So we can use this to our advantage. Okay, so this is the first input, the second input, the third input. So then what I can do is I can then construct the object I want to construct. And just say const, we'll call it body equals, I'm gonna make an object that has a name that's gonna be like form 0 dot value. So the first input in there. Okay, oops. There we go, dot value. Then we do street, we'll have to do address. And so I'm just, again, recreating the object. At the end of the day, the theme here is that there's no way for me to do the nested properties by default with the form. I have to use that data either on the front end by doing what I'm doing now, or I can use that data on the back end like I did in my route, and then reformat that data into the object that I want. There's unfortunately no happier way of doing this. Okay, so street would be form 1 dot value, the next input. And then state would be form 2 dot value. Okay, because again, basically the form tag ends up with an array of all of its inputs in its properties, which is pretty useful. So if I grab all that, that's all well and good. Okay, now let's console log it just to see like, hey, this turned out the way we wanted it. Console.log body. Okay, I'll refresh the page. Type some gibberish. And yeah, so see, there we go. We got the address, we got the nested property address. So name nested with the address, date and street, so that works. But how does that get to my server? Well, I'm gonna send that data over as JSON. So now I need different middleware. So I'm gonna go head back to my server, and I'm gonna go add the middleware to parse JSON because I'm gonna send it over as JSON. So express.json. Okay, perfect. And then that'll parse the JSON bodies. Okay. So now what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna change this back. I'm gonna get rid of this what I want piece and change this back to just console logging rec.body. Or responding with rec.body. Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay, so let's see here. Let me go back to the JavaScript in the front end. And really what we're going to do is we're going to make a request. But since we're not going to use a submit like the default form behavior, we have to make our own custom request. So you could do this with like the Ajax function in jQuery. You could do this with Axios. But I'm going to use just the built-in fetch. Okay. So essentially what would happen is I would do the fetch function, which is built into front-end JavaScript, not built into Node. And I would just say, okay, I'm going to send the request to /test. And I'll send that to /test. Then the second object was where I put all the details. So I'd say, hey, I'd like to send a method of post. And then I need to send over some headers, which is going to be an object. And the main thing I need to include is the content type header. So content type, so that way it knows that it's JSON data. So content type application /JSON. You don't have to worry about this with the form because the form already sends the URL encoded header. So we don't have to do this. But when we're doing custom requests using like fetch, Axios, or Ajax, if I'm going to send over data, I got to specify these content type headers. It's not going to do it for me. So application JSON. Then we have to send over the body of the request. So what we're going to do is we're going to send over JSON. So we're going to take the object above and stringify it into a JSON string. So we're going to stringify the body. And yeah, let's see what happens. Refresh. Okay. So see, we got we did get a response. Like if I go over here, I can see the response. The problem is that since I did the prevent default, it doesn't do like the default behavior. So basically just did this. Okay, so that was the response. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily, take over the page. I wonder if I take off the prevent default, does it then? So let's see here. Let me go take off this prevent default for real quick. Let's try that again. Yeah, it still gets a response, but it just refreshes the page. So that's the reason why you would want to use a form, because if you're taking them somewhere else, because you want to take them somewhere else. Generally, this approach with like the fetch is more used for like single page applications built with like React, Vue, Angular, because you don't want to go to another page. So then how would we confirm that I got the right thing on the screen? Well, I could do something like, what I can do is we'll sit there and do like a .then, so that way when this fetch is done, okay, I have to like parse the body, so I have to take like the response, and then do res.json to convert that response into a JavaScript object. And then I have to do a .then, and then here's where the final data comes along. And then here I can do something like, we'll do an alert that just basically says, no, actually, we'll just console log the data. Console.log data. Okay. So if I refresh this page, okay. Oh, I took off the prevent default. I gotta put that back. Boop, boop. Refresh. And there we go. So I ended up with the result I wanted. I ended up with an object that looks the way I want. The server received it. It sent it back as a response. Not too exciting. Again, this secondary approach is more for single page applications. So you wouldn't really use that if you're using a multi-page application where Express is handling like a route for each page. This would be more used if like your Express is only acting as an API, and like React or Vue or Angular is like talking to it. So in that case, it doesn't need to take you to another page because the whole app is one page. So it needs to stay on that page. But yeah, so that's how you handle nested properties in a form. There really isn't a better way of doing that. Now I'll leave you off with one cool thing you can do is if you have multiple forms, multiple properties with the same name. So if I gave these all the property name, okay, so if I gave this all the property name, and let's go back to that previous, that previous possibility where we did action/test. /test method equals post. So let's say we go back to that example. So let me just comment out all this code. So we're not using this front end code anymore. We're going to do everything out of here. Okay, now look how the rect.body goes when all the inputs have the same name. And see, it puts them into an array. So that's interesting. That can be useful. So if you have things that should show up in an array, you can actually give multiple inputs the same name, and it'll pass them over as an array of data. So that's a thing you can do. That's cool. But yeah, so hopefully this makes handling nested objects or nested properties of sort of your data a little bit easier, or makes it more clear on how to do it. Which is why oftentimes, if you can, you want to avoid nested properties. You might want to either do it through like doing multiple models or in your database, or there's different approaches to it. But this is the deal. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.